Welcome to the SMI community meeting for June 9th, 2021. We have a few discussion items today. First up, Keith Maddox, you have a few things to ask or tell us your opinion on. We'll get a discussion started. Spoiler alert, I don't know if we're going to have answers here, but we can at least get the discussion started. What would you like to talk about?
Yeah, for sure. So first, I want to just say, hey, I'm Keith Maddox. I'm a senior engineer at Shift on the DevOps team. And this is like my third SMI community meeting. So just thankful to be here and be involved and help out however I can. Love SMI and the mission and everything. So kind of tangential to that, I have been spending some time looking at the SMI Istio adapter and seeing if we can't, seeing how I can be involved there and helping fix some issues and stuff like that. Based on Git commit history, the last commit to the library, any Go code was in 2019. So I just wanted to, earlier, a few weeks ago, I tried to jump in and see how I can help. And the state of the repo is a bit unmaintained, it appears, and to say the least. And while trying to just get, move it from dep to Go modules, the dependency situation is a bit messy. Lots of non-existent revisions and dep ensure hangs. Still haven't found a working combination despite numerous replace attempts in the Go mod file. And so I wanted to kind of bring it before the community, just to say that I think this is a fantastic piece of technology. I think that having an Istio adapter for SMI will really help spur adoption of the spec. And but also to say that I can't do this, I can't do it on my own. I'm not an expert by any means, and would love to. I'm basically here asking for help, and as well as kind of getting some direction from the community, from SMI board members and stuff like that on where does this lie priority wise. Is this something that we want to put, that the community wants to put effort in, and kind of would it be easier to start from scratch based on some of the dependency situations there. So that's kind of my perspective, and I want to turn it out to everybody else to see if there's some context I'm missing, or if anybody else has ideas on how we can go about just going about solving this.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing this up. I think that Lee probably has some thoughts on this, and I know that there's work that's been happening that is relevant, but not a drop-in replacement, that Nick Jackson has been leading around the SMI controller SDK, but I know that doesn't solve the immediate issue. I'm wondering, and I see Mike Morris is also here and probably also has some thoughts on this. So I'm gonna look to Lee first, and then Mike to kind of tell us, what do you think of what's going on there? And then, if anyone else has opinions as well.
Yeah, Keith, pumped that you're here. That's great. I like it. Not sure what else you could have said that would have made it more exciting for you to be here. And I think from my perspective, your state of or your assessment of the state of the adapter is accurate. Also, I would reinforce the importance of that adapter. It's my perspective, and obviously that the world is made up of many meshes, and so this is something SMI in specific is quite important. That said, they, just like any other piece of technology, they get adopted in different. Some are more well used than others. Istio is a well used mesh, and as such, it should be. It would be our hope that it would be well represented by this spec. So what I'm saying is it is an important adapter. I'm not saying it's more or less important than any of the others, just that it's used. And that, to Bridget's point, the SMI, it probably is time to rewrite it. And it is time probably in context of SMI controller SDK. I'll say, well, I suppose with not my SMI maintain. Well, I don't know, but geez, I'm not sure. The hats get all confused. But I would say that like from some of the other hats that I wear, that myself and resources that I represent like are interested in seeing the like seeing it being a successful adapter because you know, yeah, I won't repeat the same things because it is an important one to have. So
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Mike, what are you thinking?
Yeah, so I can share a little bit here. I think the person who would be the people who we best talk to about this is Nick Jackson and Michelle Norelli. I know they've discussed some of this previously in terms of trying to have a better story for Istio support for SMI spec. I think like the like difficulty or tension here that you like might have picked up on by seeing that there hasn't been a commit to that repo in 2 years is that we have not had a lot of engagement from the Istio project on building out support for SMI historically. From the perspective of this group, we very much see Istio as one mesh of several that we do have an interest in supporting. But basically, because many of the folks here are coming from other meshes, we have Microsoft folks from representing Open Service Mesh, myself and Nick representing Console, and Michael Hasenblas from AWS App Mesh team, I believe, have been like engaged in this a lot of this effort in the past few months, I guess. We have not had like dedicated resources to be able to do work on Istio, even though it is sorely needed, is kind of the position that we're in. So I think that there are people here who would be very willing to help any contributor that is interested in doing that. And but like one path forward is, so the like project that I linked in chat, the like control SMI controller SDK, is kind of an attempt by Nick started to basically write a more abstracted controller or interface to allow easier adoption by meshes instead of the like having to write all the plumbing independently and maintain independently for Istio, for a console, etc. I know that he has some ideas on how we should like structure a project to like build an interface like to Istio using that, and I think that might be a promising path forward. I'm not sure the level of effort between doing that versus updating some of the existing Istio controller, but it is probably a good conversation to have before diving too deep in. But I guess suffice to say, like, we see the need, would be excited to help support someone that's interested in doing some of that work. So glad to have you here.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for pointing to that project. I wasn't aware of the project. So the SMI controller SDK. And so I'll definitely take a look at that. And yeah, sorry, Lee, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, actually, it's a good segue into, well, the other topic on Meshery, but it's just to note the Meshery adapter for Istio, like in context of potentially rewriting. There's well, there's a set of adapters for different service meshes. The Istio or the Meshery adapters. One of the first one was the Istio adapter, and it would deploy initially a couple of years ago. It would deploy the SMI adapter for Istio. It would deploy those series. So there's probably not much more to talk about here other than both to highlight the controller SDK and this style adapter, that as we engage in those discussions, and we should probably not wait for 2 weeks to go by before we start to, how to put, continue the discourse, like that approach should be considered as well. And they're coming, the two are coming at it from a little bit of two different directions. The controller intended to be You know what, when we get into this next topic, I'll explain it a little bit more about how it is that the mesh readapter for Istios
Yeah.
should be reflected upon, but I don't know that it's the answer.
I can also reach
Yeah.
out to Nick directly and see when he might be, if he might be able to help coordinate some of this work and kind of like point you in the right direction. So.
Yeah. And so Keith, does that kind of give you a few more hooks to get you towards answers? I know it's not answers, but does that give you something to go on?
For sure, yes, definitely. The notes you've taken here are great. The last question I have is what the best place to get in contact with Nick? Is the CNCF Slack channel appropriate? Email list? What's typically the process there?
Yeah, you can reach out to Nick Jackson on the CNCF Slack, or if you see things in the context of that SMI controller SDK repo, if you see things you want to just open issues on that repo and say, hey, I'm looking at this and I think maybe it might replace this thing I'm doing. Nick and Michelle are both actively engaged on that repo as well. So if you wanted to have the side conversation or the on repo conversation, those are both possible.
All right, thank you so much. That's it. That's pretty much it for my topic. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, Keith. And then Lee also, and I know that we don't have a full house today, so we can start this discussion and probably continue it later. Yeah, I know Lee has some input for us as to what's going on with various SMI adjacent projects.
Yeah, and the two, there's three of them, but actually maybe just two, well, I don't know, maybe there's four, depends on how you count it. Like it's a little bit, there's a lot going on. And so to Bridget's point, I think it's helpful to wade into some of that now, and then to let some of it simmer and kind of present it again. So I'm gonna try to share.
Yeah, let me let you do that. Go ahead.
There we go. And as a matter of fact, as I go to do that, well, I should probably share the link to the slides at the.
Oh, good idea. And also we have 10 minutes, so you certainly may use 10 minutes.
But be aware that okay.
I mean, I have a hard stop, so I'm turning off the recording and going in 10 minutes.
Very good. All right. Nice, good. So there's two. Okay. So yeah, to Bridget's point, we don't have the right set of folks, or there's a lot of folks that have been involved in the two projects to speak of. So these two projects, Meshery is the name of one of them. Service Mesh Performance is the name of the other one. And Mike, we'll see if Anubhav Mishra talks about SMP at all next, in a couple of weeks. I don't know if he will. But so these two projects have been proposed for adoption into the CNCF. They share much of the same. They are aligned in spirit with SMI, in so much as recognizing that the world is made up of, or the next gen layer of cloud native infrastructure is service meshes. It tends to be like a third major step that people will take as they do cloud native things, as they do lots of containers, lots of container orchestration, and then they lay down generally this mesh. And so there's it's part of the project's perspective, just like SMIs, that the world is comprised of multiple of these meshes, that some service meshes make understanding them and running them fairly straightforward, although each of them are fairly powerful and to varying degrees, and they work differently. And so there's, just like any piece of infrastructure, there's choice that people have to go through here, that adopters go through on, like, which one should I use and why, and how do I use it well, and am I doing it right, and is it causing slowness, or is it speeding things up? Where's the value? How do I understand this? How do I version my configuration? What happens when I upgrade or downgrade? Like, there's just there's all the concerns, and many of the individual projects are, or there's a lot of meshes. There's a landscape of them, and they're each dealing with, their considerations. Service meshes are generally comprised of a control plane and a data plane. It's kind of hard to get to the crux of this without explaining that, like, Meshery as a project is a management plane. So for network engineers, this is sort of a familiar 3-tiered hierarchy. And the management plane concerns can be vast. It can be quite broad. And the things that Meshery as a project desires to focus on is like, part of its goals is just uplifting and making successful the adoption and running of service meshes. It's like that's been the crux of its focus for quite some time. On the side of that are all the other things that you can do with a mesh, and of which there are many. And I think that it will take many years for some organizations to get to these things. So Meshery as a project has been, well, gosh, I have to go back and count. I guess it's coming up on a couple of years now. And so it's participated in a number of programs. It's been in and sort of the CNCF landscape for quite some long time. It has a number of project maintainers, some from VMware, some from Rackspace, some from Layer 5, some from, some that got acquired into other companies. Why am I? Anyway, there's a list of maintainers. You can go look it up. But there's a number of, Meshery was at its core designed to have adapters to be able to speak to each of the service meshes and do full lifecycle management over them, to then do workload management or application management of the services that are running on top of the meshes, to do performance management, and ultimately configuration management of the service meshes themselves, but also of the behavior of the meshes. So facilitating things like a canary, for example, or doing performance management, but not necessarily strictly from the perspective of like showing people metrics and helping them understand how well they're running versus someone else. Yes, that's part of the goal, but the other part of the goal is to help people answer questions like, how many retries should I have configured, and what's the overhead and impact of that specific to my services and my collection of services specific to my environment. So a lot of, I had mentioned, like, there's 4 projects, 2 of which are being proposed, and they tend to go deep, or they tend to go on not so much on the relatively more commonplace lifecycle management things. So in some respects, it's a young project in terms of its roadmap. So it's at like a V0.5. It's about halfway conceptually to a 1.0. Like, to speak to some of the functionality. So part of why we're going over this today is because, it's because we want to educate the maintainers of these different projects to be able to, ask ourselves collectively the questions of, like, should these continue to persist as independent projects? Should they all meld together? Should a couple of them meld together? Whatever that answer is like, can we clarify how they uplift and reinforce one another? And they've very much so been designed to do that. So Meshery, so some features that Meshery does. So some of the things that it does is will assess your service mesh deployment and analyze whether or not you're doing things in accordance with best practice. So this is a screenshot of, like, analyzing an Istio deployment to, I guess the screenshots of console, but console and anyway, to analyze your service mesh environment and tell you if you're seeing a lot of greens, you're doing it right. If you see some reds, you should probably check on that and maybe take some action. Meshery recognizes the value of specifications, abstractions like SMI, and tries to help reinforce the fact that these are specs, these are interfaces that need to be implemented to and adhered to, so that they can deliver on the full promise of being an interface, of being an API. And so Meshery, so we'll talk, I'll try to be concise and say Meshery helps do compliance testing for SMI. Meshery also helps manage filters, WASM WebAssembly-based Envoy filters. There was a prominent demonstration we did with Console at DockerCon 2020, like about a year ago, on well, that you can go watch. That's it's super intriguing. You should go watch. But anyway, point is that these artifacts, these filters are also, these areas of extensibility are things that a management plan can help provide lifecycle management of, and do some intriguing things that the control planes themselves don't intend to focus on. And so Meshry is early in its ability to manage filters, but that's part of its functionality. Another part of its functionality is sort of a new concept coming forth on service mesh patterns. So there's one book being written now, and we'll see if we don't get to a couple of them on describing the way in which service meshes are used and how they're used, hopefully fairly well, to help espouse like best practices or common patterns by which people will use service mesh functionality. These patterns, while they're being described inside of a book, they're also tangible. And so these patterns, the examples that are in the book, are patterns that are YAML that can be loaded into Meshry and shared from one Meshry instance to the next and applied, like instantiated by Meshry. They can also be, well, it's an unreleased capability, but they can also be visualized in a visual topology, like the mock-up that you see here. It looks very similar. Not only can they be visualized in terms of like how those services, how the service mesh is running, how it's configured, and whether or not the pattern is doing its thing, but also they can be designed visually. So you can drag and drop and create, modify patterns and create new mesh configurations. And so there's, patterns are also early, but there's kind of a lot of focus around those ongoing in the project. Another functional area of the project is around performance management, like we were alluding to before. So, so we'll talk more wow, we got like a minute. So we'll talk more, obviously, some other time about service mesh performance and what all the charter of that project is. So some of this that, I recognize we should send out probably in advance so that people can digest and reflect upon and have context for, so they can kind of ask questions as they come back.
Yeah, I mean, today counts as an advance, right? So
Yeah.
we can tell people, review this, review the doc, review the recording of Lee introducing us, and then at our next SMI community meeting in 2 weeks, because we have the working group for multi-cluster next week, but in 2 weeks, we should talk about this again.
Yeah.
And then maybe if you decide what your calls to action are, it would be great to, after people have had a chance to digest everything, are we looking, like, for example, are we looking for these to be in part of the SMI project, or are we looking to help them in other ways? Yeah, so
Perfect.
that sounds like a good discussion to have next week. All right. Thank you so much for starting that discussion, Lee.
Yeah, good.
All right. Do we have anything else we need to talk about? I know we're a tiny bit over time. Okay. Thank you all so much. And we will see you for multi-cluster next week and in 2 weeks for the continuation of this discussion.
Thank you, Bridget.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay,
Thanks,
bye-bye.
y'all. Have a good day.